Hi all, Rick here again with another Star Trek Legacy video looking into the lore and history of vessels both real and fictional to bear their name, Bonaventure. This one's gonna get a little messy in Star Trek lore, as numerous conflicting sources from apocryphal content all have differing accounts, but we can get to that in a minute. So, the earliest vessel I could find was the HMS Bonaventure in 1489. However, I could not find any more details on it aside from a blank wiki page, and my further digging was hampered by the fact that a variation-rigged mizzen mast of a vessel is sometimes called a Bonaventure mizzen. So moving on. In 1551, the second vessel to bear the name was the HMS Edward Bonaventure. While the Bonaventure name was in reference to its predecessor, the first name was in honour of the king at the time, King Edward VI. He was the son of Henry VIII and died at the age of 15. The ship, too, was wrecked in 1556. In 1567, there was a 47-gun galleon named the Elizabeth Bonaventure, again named for both the legacy and the monarch of the time, Elizabeth I. Its captain was Sir Francis Drake, and the vessel took part in the Great Expedition of 1585-86 and decommissioned in 1594, I think? 1621 saw a newly commissioned vessel that lasted quite some time before being destroyed in the Battle of Leghorn in 1653. In 1650, the HMS President was commissioned and renamed in 1660 to the HMS Bonaventure. This vessel had an unusually long lifespan that puts even Starfleet tenures to shame. This was in no small part due to multiple refits and overhauls, such as in 1699 when it received one of its most major refits. The vessel was relaunched in 1711 and soon renamed the HMS Argyll. It lasted all the way until 1748 when it was scuttled, giving it a total service length of 98 years. Makes me think of that thought experiment about replacing every part of a boat. In 1892, 8 Astrea-class ships were commissioned, one of which was a Bonaventure. By the time of the First World War, the ship was showing its age, and although it did survive the Great War, it served as mostly a support vessel for submarines and was sold in 1920. 1939 saw the construction and launch of the Dido-class HMS Bonaventure No. 31. It operated between Canada and the UK, transferring wealth, but was sunk in 1941. On a side note, many of the Dido-class ships had really cool names in my opinion, as they were based on historical and mythical characters. In 1942, a Cameron-class vessel was purchased by the Navy and renamed Bonaventure. It was heavily modified to become a submarine depot, which helped supply submarines, the second Bonaventure to become such a support vessel. In 1948, it was sold back to mercantile work and renamed Clan Davidson before being scrapped in 1963. At the close of the Second World War, the HMS Powerful was launched in 1945. It was a Majestic-class aircraft carrier, and in 1952 it was altered for the Royal Canadian Army and a couple of years later renamed the HCMS Bonaventure. It participated in the Cuban Missile Crisis and was decommissioned in 1970 before being scrapped a year later. Now, in Star Trek, things get messy, because there are several from lots of sources that all can't be true, and it makes listing them in chronology. You know what? I'll just read the lore for each one and you'll get the picture. In 2051, the Alpha Centauri native Zephram Cochrane discovered the plausibility of FTL travel when the Icarus initiated first contact with the planet. The vessel that was designed based on his work was the Bonaventure and had a maximum warp speed of 2.5. 10 years later, in 2061, the Earth native Zephram Cochrane created the prototype C-121 Bonaventure, the first human vessel to break the Warp 1 barrier. Outside of the lore, the ship's design is actually what the NX Phoenix was based on, and you can see the similarities with the shape and inclusion of small nacelles. This vessel successfully broke the Warp 1 barrier and ushered in a new interstellar age of exploration for mankind. 4 years later, the UNSS Bonaventure 10281 NCC, was launched and made 3 long deep space missions, the last of which was in 2079 en route to Sirius. It became caught in a weak point in space-time and slipped into the Elysium Pocket universe, where aging and energy consumption are slowed to a crawl. When the Enterprise stumbles into the same anomaly centuries later, we overhear Scotty saying it was the first vessel to have warp drive installed. On top of this, it's covered in Starfleet livery and very similar in design to a Constitution class. So as far as we can tell, it remains trapped in the Pocket universe to this day, and the majority of its inhabitants are content to live in their own Elysium society with 123 other species who are also caught in this Pocket universe. In 2143, the NX Alpha and Beta broke that tricky Warp 2 barrier, ushering in a new interstellar age of exploration for mankind. After this came the NX vessels, such as Enterprise and eventually the Foundation of the Federation in 2161, which necessitated an upgrade to Starfleet's technology, now bolstered by the cooperation of the founding members. The Bonaventure class, the first of which was the NX-1000, was designed in part by Tobin Dax, post-2163. He selected the human's twin nacelle design over the Vulcan's ring, as the Starfleet style offered greater flexibility in the use of warp. Suitable for the multi-purpose missions Starfleet was expecting to undertake. The Bonaventure class was to replace the NX refit vessels as the UFP's first deep space explorers of the 22nd century. Aside from this hot mess of continuity, we have 2 more vessels in the 23rd and 24th century to have the name Bonaventure, but there's not much to tell on these 2, not even their model. So, how to untangle all this? And because there will be comments, I'm going to say this now. Yes, this knot of contradiction is simply because these shows were revising their canon as they went, and TAS existed before Enterprise, and books aren't canon, but that's no fun, so... For a start, the events of First Contact are irrefutably shown in the film of that name, so Zephram Cochrane is not an Alpha Centauri native, and his ship was not the Bonaventure, so we can discount that as old, irrelevant lore. However, we do see that there was indeed a C-121 in canon that was intended to be Cochrane's vessel prior to the release of that film. Fortunately, no dates or specifics were given, so we can interpret the C-121 as merely a second or third prototype, maybe a refinement of the Warp 1 engine, or even an early Warp 2 attempt. Now, as the animated series introduced a new Bonaventure, all we know about it is what the crew says, and this could be inaccurate. Sorry, Scotty, but you have to be wrong, the universe demands it. The Bonaventure here is seen covered in Starfleet decals, so if it is to fit with later canon, which supersedes TAS in this instance, it would have to be post-2161. I guess it could be the first Starfleet ship to have warp drive based on some new technology, but that would be a messy retcon too, and a bit misleading. Finally, there is the Bonaventure class. The name was taken from the apocryphal content and the animated show. Although an official product, this has no canon appearances at all, but funnily enough doesn't yet contradict anything, so it's the most viable of ships of the name to exist in canon lore. A good summary of the messy early warp drive lore can be found at X*Scientia, which I'll link below. Suffice to say, in Trek, the Bonaventure name is associated with the early pioneering warp experiments of humans, and a necessary stepping stone to usher in a new stellar age of exploration for mankind, even if nobody seems sure what or how that all happened. Thanks for watching this video on the legacy of the Bonaventure. This spun off from trying to make a video on that Pocket Universe Elysium, so feel free to suggest topics for me to look into, as who knows where they'll end up. Thanks again, I've been Rick, and until next time, goodbye.